An officer mistreats an immigrant on the street, but Kristi Noem was right behind him and saw it all. You ever notice how injustice always seems to happen when no one's watching? Like the world's worst moments are perfectly timed to avoid accountability. But what if just once the right person was standing in the shadows, someone with the power not just to witness it, but to stop it? That's exactly what happened on a hot afternoon in El Paso, when a young immigrant named Luis got humiliated in broad daylight and had no idea who was standing just a few feet away. This wasn't a staged intervention, no flashing badges, no dramatic rescue music, just raw reality and a woman in plain clothes who refused to look the other way. What followed wasn't just justice, it was a masterclass in leadership, firm, human, and deeply uncomfortable for those who thought no one was watching. Spoiler, someone was. And if you think this is just another viral video, think again. What happened next didn't just change one life. It ignited a conversation the whole country had been avoiding. The Texas sun was unforgiving that day, not just in heat, but in silence. The kind of silence people use to pretend they didn't see what they just saw. A young immigrant was being berated in the middle of a busy street, his voice low, respectful, and unheard. The officer, towering and loud, was in full display of his power, and in that moment, everyone watching did what most people do. They looked, then looked away. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Right behind the chaos, parked quiet as a whisper, was a black SUV. Windows tinted, engine off. Inside it, Kristi Noem. And no, she wasn't there for politics or press. She was on one of her unannounced inspections, the kind where no one knows she's coming and every word spoken is real. She didn't jump out. She watched first, listened, took it all in. You see, leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it watches when others won't. And while the officer raised his voice and the vendor lowered his gaze, something was shifting just meters away. A decision was already forming, the kind that flips the script. And oh, did the story flip. The heat clung to the sidewalks like sweat on skin. El Paso was alive, the kind of alive where wheels clatter over pavement, where salsa music blends with honking horns, and where survival isn't a concept, it's a routine. Immigrants lined the streets with ice chests, makeshift carts, and plastic coolers filled with candy, water, and dreams they hoped might sell for $1 apiece. Here it wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. That's what people forget. Behind every sidewalk stand is a story, usually one packed with more grit than most politicians have in their speeches. These weren't scammers. These were people who knew what it meant to start from nothing and hustle every day just to stay afloat. No safety nets, no plan B, just the will to live another day with dignity. Among the crowd, one vendor in particular moved differently, quieter, more cautious. His eyes scanned for more than customers. He scanned for uniforms, for trouble, for them. And as fate would have it, trouble was about to find him, right there in the middle of the sun, sales and silence. Luis wasn't just selling candy, he was buying time. Every lollipop, every soda can from his cooler was a little bit of rent, a bit more medicine for his mom back home. He moved through the crowd with quiet determination, his shoulders slightly hunched, not from fatigue but from years of learning how not to be seen. That's how you survive when you're undocumented. You become invisible. Blend in. Don't draw attention. Just breathe and keep moving. He wasn't loud. He didn't hustle customers or block sidewalks. He picked shaded corners, waited for nods, whispered prices. He knew the rules of this kind of life. Be smaller than the moment. His mother's condition had worsened recently, and the hospital bills were piling up. He didn't complain, not to anyone. Luis was the kind of man who turned struggle into silence, and silence into resilience. But no matter how quiet you try to be, sometimes the world finds a way to test you. And for Luis, that test came in a uniform, a badge, a heavy voice laced with impatience, and suddenly, being invisible wasn't enough anymore. The first words from the officer weren't a question, they were a command. Move, now. No explanation, no room for dialogue, just that sharp, clipped tone that says, you don't belong here. Luis looked up, startled but composed, and tried to speak, to explain. But the officer wasn't interested in explanations. In his eyes, Luis was already guilty of existing in the wrong place. Do you even have a permit? Are you even legal? The cop snapped, his hand resting on his belt just close enough to intimidate. Luis shook his head gently, choosing every word like a landmine. Sir, I'm not in the way. I'm just trying to... He never finished. Because when people like Luis speak, they're rarely heard. The badge was louder than his voice ever could be. And around them, people watched. Some slowed their steps. Some whispered, but no one stepped in. That's how these things go. Everyone sees it. No one touches it. But while the street stayed quiet, something, or someone, was about to break the cycle from the shadows. Luis didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. He simply nodded, trying to reason with the officer like any decent person would. "Please, I'm just trying to help my mum. I'll move if—" But that's when it happened. With one swift kick, the officer sent Luis's cooler crashing to the sidewalk. Candy and drinks scattered across the concrete like they meant nothing. Just like that, everything Luis had worked for that day was crushed under a boot. The crowd gasped quietly. A few hands went to mouths. Someone's phone started recording. But Luis didn't scream. He didn't shout. He dropped to his knees, shaking hands, gathering what he could, pride shattered, but still intact. There's a particular kind of silence that hits when dignity is stolen in front of strangers. It's heavy. It lingers. And Luis felt every second of it. But not all silence is weakness. Sometimes it's the moment before a storm. And in this case, that storm was about to step out of a black SUV parked just a few feet away. People were watching. They always watch. Some had their phones out. Others stood frozen, caught between outrage and fear. But no one stepped forward. That's the thing with public injustice. It paralyzes. It turns witnesses into statues. Everyone feels something, but no one moves. And while Luis scrambled to gather his scattered goods, the street buzzed with the same energy as a held breath. Then, almost unnoticed, a sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb. No sirens, no tinted drama, just presence. It parked like it belonged there, quietly asserting that something important was about to happen. A few people turned, eyes narrowing. Whoever was inside hadn't moved yet. But the atmosphere shifted, like the moment before a curtain lifts. Sometimes change doesn't arrive with noise. It shows up in silence, watching, waiting. And inside that car was someone who'd seen enough. Inside that SUV, sitting calm and composed, was Kristi Noem, not in a press-ready suit, not flanked by agents, just her. Low-profile civilian clothes, sharp eyes under a baseball cap. This wasn't a scheduled visit. No cameras, no aides, just instinct and purpose. She came to observe, to listen without filters. But what she saw, that flipped her switch from observer to responder in seconds. Her eyes didn't flinch as the officer kicked the cooler. She watched the candy scatter, saw the shame in Luis's posture, the trembling in his hands. And she knew this wasn't about immigration law or city codes. This was about dignity. And when dignity gets stomped on, it's not just one person who bleeds. It's a message to everyone like him. She didn't move yet. Sometimes power is about timing, waiting for the moment when stepping in changes the entire game. And that moment, it was already rising, one step at a time. Kristi wasn't in El Paso for a photo op. She was there for answers. After weeks of hearing whispers about intimidation, about undocumented vendors being harassed, about uniforms used like weapons, she decided to show up where the noise lived. No entourage, no advance notice. Just her, a driver, and a stack of field reports that felt more like warnings than data. That's the kind of leader she aimed to be. Not one who sits behind bulletproof glass reading sanitized versions of chaos, but one who puts her boots where the pain is, who sees the stories before they get filtered through politics. And this street corner, it was just one of many she planned to hit that day. But as fate would have it, this wasn't just a stop on her map. It was the stop. Because what she saw from that car window wasn't just misconduct. It was the exact moment when policy meets the pavement and dignity gets kicked into the gutter. The officer's voice rose with every insult, like he was performing for an invisible crowd. "You people are all the same," he spat. "Parasites, living off our streets." His words sliced through the hot air, each one louder, uglier, more humiliating. Luis didn't look up. He didn't dare. Not because he was weak, but because that's what survival had taught him. Endure it quietly or risk everything. Passers-by flinched. A few phones captured the moment, but no one spoke. It was as if the uniform gave him permission to dehumanize, and the badge had become a shield for cruelty. This wasn't about sidewalk space, it was about domination, making an example, reminding everyone watching who had power and who didn't. But what that officer didn't know, someone was watching, someone who did have power and wasn't afraid to use it when it mattered. And she had already opened her door. She didn't slam the door. She didn't bark orders. Kristi Noem stepped out of that SUV like a storm walks into town, quiet, focused, unshakable. Her movements were calm, but every step carried weight. She didn't need to flash a badge. Authority, when it's real, doesn't shout. It enters a scene and changes the temperature without saying a word. The people nearby started to notice. Heads turned, whispers circled like wind. Someone lowered their phone and just watched. You could feel the shift, because when someone walks like they belong, people sense it. And Kristi, she wasn't walking to watch anymore, she was walking to intervene. And as she closed in, the officer's rant kept going, unaware that justice had just walked up behind him, in jeans and a soft-spoken fury that would change everything. It hit him like a cold slap, the realization. Mid-sentence, mid-rant, the officer caught her in his periphery. He turned, eyes narrowing, then widening as the image clicked in his brain. Kristi Noem, standing right there. No headlines, no security detail, just her, watching. And suddenly, all that bark in his voice dried up like dust. His spine straightened, his jaw clenched. You could almost see the panic rising behind his eyes, because this wasn't just a bystander. This was the Secretary of Homeland Security. And she hadn't come with a microphone. She came with receipts. Every second of his behavior now had a witness with more power than his badge could cover. And in that brief silence, that raw, awkward, irreversible moment, the street went still. Everyone felt it. The shift, the weight, the tension of justice about to speak, without needing to raise its voice. She didn't need volume, just presence. Kristi looked him square in the eye and asked, not shouted, "This is how you wear that uniform? By humiliating someone just trying to work?" Her voice was calm, but it cut deeper than a scream ever could. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you're right and that everyone else can feel it too. The officer tried to answer, but his words stumbled out of his mouth like broken excuses. There was no script for this, no protocol for being confronted by the woman in charge, especially when you've just made a public mess in front of her. He looked down. The badge on his chest suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and the crowd, they weren't just watching anymore, they were witnessing, phones up, eyes locked, because something rare was unfolding, accountability in real time. The moment Kristi spoke, everything else stopped. You could have heard a soda can drop 3 blocks away. Conversations froze, footsteps paused. The only thing moving was the slow rise of phones being raised, not to capture drama, but to document something real. Everyone knew this wasn't just about Luis anymore. It was bigger, it was symbolic. The officer, now visibly rattled, tried to salvage himself. I thought he was causing an obstruction. I didn't mean, but his voice cracked under the weight of the moment. It wasn't just guilt. It was exposure, and exposure doesn't forgive easily, especially not when it's being live-streamed. You could almost see the narrative flipping in real time, from street corner harassment to a national reckoning, and it wasn't over yet, not even close. Without flinching, Kristi locked eyes with him. Name, badge number, now. Her tone didn't rise, but the gravity in her voice could have cracked pavement. The officer hesitated, still clinging to a thread of control, until he saw that she wasn't asking, she was ordering. And when someone like Kristi Noem gives an order, even the boldest uniforms start to shrink. He mumbled the info, barely audible, and she didn't even blink. You're done for today. Effective immediately. You're under investigation for abuse of authority. And just like that, the script flipped. The badge that had once given him power now became a receipt. A receipt for every word, every insult, every act he thought no one would challenge. The street didn't cheer. It held its breath. Because accountability isn't a spectacle. It's a reset. And the reset had only just begun. After cutting through the noise, Kristi turned to the one voice no one had listened to. Luis. She walked over, slower now, her tone shifting like a breeze after a storm. No authority, no distance, just care. She knelt slightly, looked him in the eyes and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Luis didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His throat tightened, and his hands were still trembling. For a second, he thought it was a trick. No one of her status had ever looked him in the eye with that kind of sincerity. He nodded slowly, blinking back the weight of disbelief. He wasn't just grateful, he was stunned. After all the times he'd been ignored, threatened, erased, someone finally saw him, really saw him. And in that simple exchange, a quiet question, a silent nod, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't just about today. It was about everything that had led up to this moment, and everything that might come next. She didn't just offer pity, she offered presence. "Come with me," Kristi said gently. "Let's get a coffee. I want to hear your story." Luis blinked, unsure if he heard her right. A few minutes ago, he was picking crushed candy off the pavement. Now he was being invited, not interrogated, by one of the most powerful women in the country. He hesitated, not out of fear but out of disbelief. His entire life, people like her had been unreachable, untouchable, but her voice wasn't staged. It was real. He glanced at the mess behind him, then at her open expression, and he said yes. Because when someone finally listens, really listens, you don't say no. So they walked together, not as officer and immigrant, not as government and citizen, but as two people caught in a story bigger than either of them could have predicted. Sitting across from Kristi, with the hum of a quiet cafe around them, Luis opened up slowly, like a door that had been rusted shut for years. He told her about his mother, sick and housebound, about the jobs that never called back, the rent that never waited, and the constant ache of walking through life as if he didn't exist. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I just want a chance." Kristi didn't interrupt. She didn't take notes. She just listened like his words mattered more than any report on her desk. And for Luis, that alone was groundbreaking, because in his world, people listened just long enough to dismiss you, but not this time. This time, someone with power was leaning in, really hearing him. He talked about fear, about always looking over his shoulder, about the weight of being grateful and afraid at the same time. And though he didn't say it directly, one thing rang clear. Being honest had never been the problem. Being invisible had. When Luis finished, Kristi leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "You shouldn't have to live like that," she said. "No one should." She pulled out her phone, typed a name, and made a call. Not for show, but because she meant business. "I'm connecting you with a team at DHS," she continued. "They'll help you navigate legal status and access a small business program." Luis blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. Legal support? Economic help? From them? She wasn't just offering sympathy, she was opening a door. A real one. "You're not alone anymore," she added. "Let's start making things right. Not just for you, but for everyone like you." And just like that, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel so permanent anymore. He didn't cry, he didn't cheer. He just sat back, holding that moment in his chest, like a breath he'd been waiting years to take. And outside, the world kept spinning. But for Luis, everything had just shifted. By the time the sun dipped behind the El Paso skyline, the video had already made its rounds. What started as a quiet act of injustice had become a loud cry for accountability, and Kristi's calm but commanding presence was at the heart of it. The footage wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was real, and sometimes real is enough to shake a nation awake. People didn't just share it, they felt it. Comments poured in like floodwater. "This is what leadership looks like." Finally, someone stood up. The video wasn't about politics. It was about dignity, about someone in power using that power to lift instead of crush. And in a world addicted to outrage, this story sparked something different. Hope. And hope, when it spreads fast enough, becomes movement. Luis wasn't just a candy vendor anymore. He was a symbol. And Kristi? She wasn't just a government official, she was a message. One that said, "We see you, we hear you. And this time, we're not looking away." What began as one street confrontation grew into a ripple inside the walls of the very system Kristi led. The Department of Homeland Security wasn't just watching, it was re-evaluating. Trainings shifted, protocols got rewritten. For the first time in years, empathy became a core metric in internal discussions, because that single moment, captured in pixels, revealed a truth too raw to ignore. Policy without humanity is just paperwork. Across the country, the video sparked something deeper. Talk shows debated it, classrooms studied it, and even longtime cynics nodded in cautious respect. Suddenly, people were asking bigger questions. What does justice look like on the ground? How do we protect without dehumanizing? What if immigration stories were told like Luis's, not in numbers, but in names? And inside DHS, the tone changed, quietly, steadily, because the greatest reforms often don't start in conference rooms, they start on sidewalks, with people, with pain, and with one leader who chose not to walk past it. So after everything you've seen, what's your takeaway? Because here's the truth. You don't need a badge or a title to stand up for someone. You need courage, the kind that sees a human being first, not a stereotype. So let me ask you, if you were in Kristi's shoes that day, would you've stepped in, or would you've kept walking? This story isn't just about Luis. It's about every person who's ever felt invisible, every leader who's ever wondered if kindness belongs in power, and every one of us who's been a bystander when we could have been a bridge. Maybe it's time to stop scrolling past stories like these and start living them. If this hit you somewhere deep, if it made you think, feel, or even get a little angry, then don't just nod and move on. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell so you don't miss the next story that matters, because together, we're rewriting what power should look like.